Everybody, we are the cybersecurity team. As you already know, we are Daniel, Jose Maria, Lorena from University Carlos III of Madrid and from University of Seville. We have Jaime, Rafa, and Antonio. So let's start with cybersecurity. First of all, why we are here? Why do we need security? We need security because of this. This is just a picture which shows the amount of cyber attacks which are happening daily. Well, not daily, yes, every single minute we have cyber attacks. So in this picture, we can see the amount of attacks that are happening between countries. And then this is why we need cybersecurity. We're gonna show you just a couple of examples about the need of cybersecurity. For instance, it happens just some months ago, I think it was in January of this year. Crypto.com is a website in which you can exchange cryptocurrency, I mean digital money. So you can exchange money. And this web page was hacked, and around 35 millions of dollars were hacked. So because of that, we need to be aware of cybersecurity, not just as a cybersecurity expert, but also as a user. Because in many cases, attacks goes into or came into organization because of us. Another example is this. It happens in Microsoft. This is a Lasus extortion group, okay? This is a hackers group, let's say, who carry out an attack, and part of Microsoft code related to, for example, Cortana, which is the voice assistant, or Bing, which is the search engine, okay, was hacked. So it was a data leak. Again, why? Because, well, we have problems with cybersecurity countermeasures. But we have to be considered that cybersecurity is a process, it's not a service. So we have to maintain cybersecurity little by little. And this is hard, because the risk is not zero, never will be zero. So we have to be aware of that. So this is why we need cybersecurity, because there are many attacks every single minute in the world. So now the point is, okay, we need cybersecurity, but what is cybersecurity? Well, just in general terms, this is a formal definition, but in general, it would say just the protection of our systems, or devices, or smartphones, or laptops, whatever, against confidentiality, integrity, and availability attacks. So this is directly related to what we call the CIA triangle, which is linked to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So what are these three main properties? First of all, confidentiality. If data is confidential, if the communication is confidential, it means that no one, except for an authorized party, is going to access to a particular information. So we need to provide confidentiality. How? Later on, I will explain you just the main tips. But for example, if we apply encryption, we provide confidentiality. Also, another important property is integrity. So integrity means that data, communication, whatever, is not going to be modified. It means that, for instance, if I want to send to my sister a message, the message is not going to be altered, modified by a third party. And this is the integrity property. This is, for example, very important in operating systems. Why? Because if I store data in my operating system, or there are particular files in my operating systems, they should be stored without being modified by any kind of malicious software or application, okay? So really important problem. How can we provide integrity? Again, applying cryptography. But in this case, applying hash functions, which are another kind of cryptographic algorithms that we don't have time to get in deeper. And finally, availability. Well, you already know what availability means. It means that if you want to access to a service or a system or whatever, that service system will be available for you to access, to buy, in case of Amazon to buy, in case of a bank to make a transaction, or whatever, okay? So this is the CIA triangle, And these are the main properties of cybersecurity. Now, okay, now that we know the properties, what about the threats? What are the main threats? This is a general classification. This is not any kind of attacks. Later on, I will explain you some attacks. So, the first threat could be interception. If we have a sender and we have a receiver, we are in the middle of the communication. We can collect information. This is an interception attack, namely. So if I were in class, I could access students. Okay, what is the cybersecurity property which is directly affected by interception, an interception attack? So I'm in a seminar, so I'm not going to make these questions, but I'm going to give you just 10 seconds to think of it, and after that I will give you the answer, okay? What is the cybersecurity property which is directly related to this attack? So just 10 seconds to think about it. Well, hopefully you have thought of confidentiality. Why? Because if we collect information about whatever, then I'm accessing to data that I shouldn't, okay? This is why confidentiality is affected. And why, for instance, in a communication, we apply cryptography. Because even if the communication is intercepted, no one is going to access to any kind of data. Okay, nice. Now, interruption. In this case, if any kind of service is interrupted or system, maybe because, I don't know, your operating system is blocked and you cannot get access to your operating system, this could be an interruption attack. Or maybe, I don't know, you cannot access to a bank, you cannot access to a social network at some point in time. This is because of an interruption attack. So again, I'm not going to ask you the cybersecurity property, but this is quite easy. This threat is directly related to a cybersecurity property. So I give you 10 seconds just to think of it. Yeah? Yeah, exactly, availability. If availability is going to be directly affected by this kind of attacks. Thank you very much. And now another attack is modification. In this case, later on I will explain you some real examples of this. Modification means that we have data, we have files, we have whatever, and it's modified by malicious software. So imagine we have a database, and the database is attacked, and instead of, it's a bank database, so instead of saying that you have, I don't know, 100 euros, you have 2,100 euros, okay? It could be a modification attack. Again, this is directly related to a cybersecurity property. I give you 10 seconds just to think of it. What is it? Yeah, the remaining one. Thank you. Integrity. This is directly related to integrity. This is why we need some kind of countermeasures to ensure that our files, well, the integrity is preserved. And finally, this is fabrication. And this is a little bit tricky because we can discuss about it. It's just a threat which generates traffic or data, could be malicious. And obviously, if this threat is assumed to be malicious, okay, just to cause different things. For instance, fabrication could cause an interruption attack. Why? Because you generate as many traffic as possible, and then your service is overflowed. So in this case, it is not related directly to a particular cybersecurity property, but we can combine different properties, right? So now we have the general notions that now we're going to get in deeper about existing attacks related to each of the threats. So, first of all, we have concerning interception, we have a banking Trojan, which maybe some of you have heard of Zeus Trojan. Zeus Trojan has been, well, it was really well known. It was a banking Trojan just to steal your information when you log in your bank. So you access to your bank account, you introduce your credentials, your username, and username or DNI or whatever, and your password. And this Trojan will collect your keys, okay? Could be similar like a keylogger. Just you write and your keys are collected. Obviously, this is quite a malicious application. Why? Because with your credentials, someone can do malicious actions, can make transactions on behalf of you, and so on. This is why, for instance, in banks, multi-factor authentication is implemented, or even when you do a transaction, maybe the bank asks you for a code or whatever. This is because of this. Because maybe, because of a Trojan, because of whatever, someone get your password and ID, but if another security countermeasure is implemented, hackers don't get the real goal, okay? So again, what we do as a cybersecurity expert is just to put different barriers, okay, to make the attack difficult. If we talk about interruption, obviously we need to talk about denial of service attack. So what's a denial of service attack? We have servers. Here that we have servers, it means, for example, we have the university server, or we have a bank server or whatever, and we are here, we are the bots. Bots means that we are infected, or computers could be infected, and once infected, they became bots, okay, robots. So became bots, and they are waiting for what? Waiting for orders. An order from a server which is called the command and control. The command and control is like the boss, okay? The boss makes orders, and such orders are going to be executed by bots, okay? So once the command and control say, hey, attack this particular server, means, for instance, access this particular server, then all the computers at once says, okay, I'm gonna access to that particular server. Obviously, here we are around 16 people, but if we were more, it will be million trying to access to a web page at once. Maybe the web page is overflowed, okay? So this is a denial of service attack. What we call distributed denial of service attack, the idea is more or less the same, but the attack is more powerful because there are more bots, more computers which are infected, just to say in a simple words, okay? This is an interruption attack. And now modification. This is a little bit more complex, but I will explain you as easy as possible, okay? DLL injection attack is a type of modification attack. Why? A DLL, I assume that you know, DLLs are libraries. I mean, if you are programming, you reuse code. Obviously, you do not generate code from scratch, okay? So in Windows, DLLs are files which contains libraries. So developers, when want to develop a program from Windows, okay, it is commonly to call functions within DLL files. Now, the point is that a modification attack can be carried out in the way that, imagine you have a process which is opened. So what is a process? Imagine that the calculator in Windows is open, okay? The calculator is a process. So instead of thinking of the calculator, you can think of a web browser, you can think of Microsoft Word, you can think of whatever you want which is open. This is a process. So when the process is opened, then the attacker says, okay, I'm gonna reserve a little bit of a space in this process, okay, in the memory of the process. Obviously, this is internal, I cannot explain, you know the words. Reserve a little bit of a space in the process and then injects the DLL. I mean, injects a malicious function, okay? And then, when you use the calculator, the malicious function is executed. In this case, the malicious function just opens a pop-up just to say, hey, you have been hacked. Obviously, this is not malicious. But instead of showing a pop-up, could be deleting your files, could be sending your files to a malicious server, okay? So, this is a modification attack, and this is quite well known. I have shown you this with the calculator because I think that this is easier, okay, for you to understand. But this is quite powerful because a lot of different attacks can be carried out with a DLL injection attack. Okay, This is a modification threat. And now, what about fabrication? I'm sure that you already know what, maybe you don't know what is email spoofing, but I'm sure that if you go to your spam folder, you find a lot of emails, or more, I don't know, a lot, okay? But I'm sure that you have emails, which are forged sender address. I mean, the sender address has been in some kind modified by a malicious attacker. And maybe you receive an email like this from a bank. Imagine your bank, I don't know your banks, but imagine that your bank is Bank of America. And then you receive an email, presumably by Bank of America. Obviously, this is forged, okay? This is email spoofing, has been changed, the sender. Just say, okay, I'm the Bank of America. Please, we have problem issues in the web page, and we need you to change your username and password. Or they can create any kind of email, okay? This is email spoofing, because in this case, if you click here in the link, okay, you will access to a web page which is exactly the same. The appearance would be exactly the same as Bank of America, but indeed, it is not the right URL. Indeed, if we just put the mouse over this URL, just click, not click, but just put the mouse over, we will see that the URL does not match. And this is a trick which is commonly used by many hackers, not just in emails, but in maybe in web pages, because nobody looks at the URL. So I would recommend you always to look at the URL just to be sure that you are accessing, when you always insert private information in a web page, such as an email, an address, or a password especially, it is good to look at the URL. But be careful, okay? Because a lot of attacks can be carried out just to change the URL. Okay? So this is email spoofing, and this is a fabrication threat. And this is quite well known, because all of us have suffered this kind of attack at some point in time. Okay? These are the general classification of threats. Now, I'm going to introduce very briefly another type of threats, which is really relevant, and especially nowadays, I will explain you later, which are called advanced persistent threats. These threats are advanced. It means that they are extremely complex and sophisticated. A lot of malicious software are used, okay? A lot of malicious software are used, and you need to know a lot to carry out this kind of attacks. I will explain you with an example later. So advanced means sophisticated. Persistent. Persistent, why? Persistent because from the moment the attack starts until you discover, maybe it takes around 2 years or even more for you to discover. This is especially useful for espionage, and currently today, well, it exists, because these kind of threats are supported, are sustained by states. Why? Because as you may imagine, if it is advanced, it's sophisticated, it's complex, you need time, you need resources. And resources is just money, and resources means people. People, money, time. So because of that, states are behind this kind of attacks. Okay, when we talk about Russia and whatever, yeah, Russia is behind. In many cases, well, obviously, presumably, we don't really know, obviously. Or when we say United States, or all the countries have advanced persistent threats, okay? And obviously, it's a threat because it's an attack, okay? So, what are the steps? Why it's difficult, complex, and so on? Okay, the attack at the very beginning is launched. It's executed, okay? It means that, for example, you receive in your company an email, and you open the email, and nothing happens. Yes, nothing happens, okay? But your computer is infected. Imagine that you are an employee in a bank. So your computer is infected, and from your computer, they carry out a escalation of privilege attack and move to the bank database. So, infect, control, find information that they want. For example, they want to look for the customer's database. So when the information is found, okay, then espionage starts. They collect information, the information that they want, obviously, but in a stealthy way, okay, without being noticed. And finally, this is why they persist until they are discovered. I'm going to show you just an example of these threats. Stuxnet was the first known or at least identified advanced persistent threat. It was discovered in 2010, okay? And it happens in a nuclear power plant in Iran. The idea was that, well, it was the nuclear power plant and the centrifuge that, which generates the nuclear power stops. Okay, engineers fix it, okay. Months later, another centrifuge stops. Engineers, again, fix it. Some months later, another centrifuge stops. Engineers fix it. So they discovered, until 2 years or more, that their systems were infected because of an advanced persistent threat. Presumably, the origin, okay, was presumably United States. Obviously, it is not confirmed. Anyone is going to raise a hand, okay, hey, it's me. Obviously not, okay? So when we are talking about advanced persistent threats, we don't know the origin, but we have indicators which says is this particular country, okay? So this is why we have to be very, very careful with the emails that we open and so on, okay? Because could be just the entrance point, okay? Because I can talk too much and maybe, I don't know. Okay, indeed, it happens because an engineer, well, not an engineer, an employee found in the garage of the nuclear power plant, found an USB. Oh my God, found the USB, connect the USB in the nuclear power plant, and from that moment on, it was infected. The computer, the organization was infected. This is why, you know, it's not a good practice to use USBs. Indeed, in my case, I'm really worried about that. I never try to use these USBs, for instance, in the laboratories or so on, because I'm really worried about that. There are malicious softwares like worms, for instance, which can be which move a lot and can move to my USB forever, okay? So this is not a good practice. And obviously this is why in many organizations, from those who work in companies, I assume that maybe you cannot use the USB because of that, because of security countermeasure, as a cybersecurity countermeasure. And now we're gonna move on. We're gonna move on to information security, how we can protect our information. Obviously, I'm gonna give you just the key points. We're going to talk a little bit about cryptography and a little bit about access control, because at least to me and to us are the main properties or the main ways to protect our information. Concerning cryptography, I'm going to talk to you about different algorithms and so on. So we're going to assume that there are keys, that we have a issuer, a sender and receiver, okay? And both of them have a key, regardless of the key, regardless of the algorithm. The idea is that the sender and the receiver have the key, and the communication between them is going to be encrypted. For instance, it happens when we access to the bank. When we access to the browser, to a browser, for example, to Chrome browser, we see a locker. The locker means this, means that the communication and me and the bank is encrypted, okay? Well, a lot of attacks can be carried out, but I don't want to confuse yourself. So if you see the locker, you are protected. Not really, okay? But we are going to assume that you are protected, okay? This is cryptography. This is just a way to protect our information, but we have to be very careful with encoding. I assume that, especially with COVID, or at least here in Spain, you know what is a CAPTCHA. This is especially useful in restaurants. Instead of seeing the menu, okay, physically, you just scan the CAPTCHA and so on. Okay, it is really important to know the difference between encoding and cryptography, because many people, or at least people that I talk to, confuse the things. The idea with encoding is that we are not going to use the keys. And many people, in some cases, see characters that They don't know it's this is encrypted. No, you have to be careful. Maybe it's encoding. And with I don't know, Notepad++, you can see different encodings. So instead of thinking that something is encrypted, you can use a particular program just to change between different encodings. Okay? So this is, for example, in the first configuration of Tomcats, Tomcat server, I assume that you have heard about that. Well, it doesn't matter, it's just a server, okay? The first, depending on the configuration, okay, one of the tokens which is used to get access control can be encoded in base 64. Base 64 is just a type of encoding, it doesn't matter. But just encode it. So if you use a sniffer, if you carry out an interception attack that you already know what is this, if you carry out an interception attack and the information is just encoded, you can collect such information, okay? So this is why cryptography is important. But we have to consider what is called the Kirchhoff principle, which says a crypto system should be secure even if everything about the system, except for the key, is publicly known. It means that we work under the assumption that security is public. I mean, security through security is not good. Why? Because all the algorithms are standards which are already published. So any hacker's malicious guy which is outside can access to such algorithms. So this is why we need to use a key which is secret. This is why we always insist on the importance of the key, on not using your POSIT with the password. Or usually the password is not a key, okay? But maybe in many cases your password protects a key, okay? A password can protect a key. So this is why we insist on that. The only security, the security of a lot of systems focus on the key. So if the key is known, we have a problem, okay? So from now on, you have to be very, very careful with that, okay? Algorithms are public, so we have to be really careful with what about the key. Now, so what do we encrypt? Because if we have a system, what are the data that we are going to encrypt? Well, first of all, we can think of sensitive data. If I'm in a bank, I could think of sensitive data. If I'm at home, what is the data which is important for me to store? Maybe, I don't know, all the information that is stored currently in Google Drive. Maybe, do I trust Google? Maybe not. So in these cases, it could be good to encrypt the data. But we have to be careful. Be careful because of what? Because of performance. Cryptography is directly related to performance. If you encrypt a lot, you need time to decrypt. So this is why we have to keep a balance, okay? I'm going to encrypt, but maybe not everything. Maybe just the things which are going to be stored for a long time, okay? We can discuss a lot about this because it is quite controversial. But another thing that we should consider is that to encrypt and decrypt, obviously, we need keys. We need a key, okay? And one important thing is that the key should not be stored together with encrypted data. It seems to be obvious, okay? Maybe you say, obviously, I don't want to store the key, the encryption key together with encrypted data. But in an organization, management problems can appear because of that, okay? So at the very beginning, it should be easy, okay? It's easy, it's sensible. You say, oh my God, obviously. But from the management point of view, it can be hard. So we should consider maybe to store the keys in another database, in another place, in another company, I mean, separated. Just in case a database is hacked, the other ones, the one with the decryption key not, okay? And finally, another point that I'm going to mention about information security, apart from cryptography, is access control. In access control, there are three main concepts to consider. Access control is the process that when you try to access to a particular system or application, okay, the whole process should be monitored and it consider access control. Access control is composed of authentication. Authentication means, as is already here, is who you are. You need to prove who you are. This is authentication. I will explain you a little bit more later. Then, once you are in the system, because you know who you are. I mean, you have introduced your username and password, whatever you are in Gmail, or you are, for example, in Moodle, I'm a teacher, okay? So when I'm in Moodle as a teacher, the second part is authorization. Authorization means what are the permissions that I have? So I'm a teacher, so maybe I can create a survey, I can create an exam for students or whatever. So this is my role, but depending on the role, the permissions could change. This is authorization. And finally, along the whole process should be auditing. Auditing means that all the actions are going to be stored in some kind of log or whatever, just in case something happened, to be able to know or to check what is happening, okay? Who is the one who has registered in this computer at this hour, what are the actions that has carried out, and so on, okay? This is access control. And just to conclude a little bit about authentication, we need to talk about these three main issues. Is something you are. Authentication based on something you are, you already know. Based on your fingerprint in your smartphone, for instance, you use the fingerprint, you use your eyes. Maybe if you have a service, maybe you can use your eyes, your face, but you have to be careful with that because I have a twin sister like, whoa, and I have problems because you try to lock. When you try to log in a surface, I can be locked as my sister, okay, because we are twins. So we have to be careful with false positives, false negatives, and so on, with something you are, biometric systems, okay, we have to be careful with that. And another thing is, okay, something you have, based on something you have. For instance, when you look in a bank and the bank sends you a code and you need your smartphones, it means that something you are, okay? Authentication based on that. And finally, something you know, which is the most well-known way of authentication, based on the password. And now I could been talking a lot, about 20 minutes about what is a good password, because if I talk to you about what is a good password, many of you would say capital letters, lower letters, special symbols or whatever. Yes, but according to the new, well, it's not a standard, okay, just a guide from the NIST says that the best thing is to generate a password based on something that you know, but a long password. For instance, based on, I don't know, a song that you know, and you just collect some of the letters of the song that you like. I don't know, Michael Bublé, I haven't met you yet, okay? I haven't met you yet. So you collect just the initial letters of the song or whatever you want. This is a good password, a long one, remember, a long one. Because if you create a password with 5 characters, even capital letters, lower letters, special characters, this is not secure at all, currently. So imagine in the future, okay? So these are the main ways to authenticate yourself, based on something you are, you have, and you know. And finally, just to mention, multi-factor authentication means just to combine different ways of authentication. I would recommend you, but to me, it's mandatory nowadays, okay? Because I have to assume that my password has been leaked. I have to assume that the hacker is going to know my password. So this is why multi-factor authentication is really important. Here at the uni, for instance, currently, well, the security team has taught us, has encouraged teachers to use multi-factor authentication, okay? So remember, if at some point in time you can choose the way you authenticate, use more than one, okay? Just in your organization. Okay, and this is time for Rafa, network security. Floor yours.